Before we begin this long and gentle journey into the strange world of medieval medicine, I'd like to ask you for just one small favor. Try to stay with me until the end of the video. Even if you're drifting into sleep, your subconscious will still be listening. And if you're awake enough to leave a comment, I'd love for you to write how you're feeling right now. Are your eyelids starting to feel heavy? Good. That means you're exactly where you need to be. Now, settle in, take a long, deep breath, and let's take a quiet stroll through the darker, stranger corners of history. It's the year 1327. The morning is gray and damp. We find ourselves in a small European town, where the cobblestone streets are slick with mud, and the air carries a heavy, earthy scent. In the distance, you can hear the slow creaking of a cartwheel, the soft whinny of a horse, and the faint clang of a church bell. You walk past crooked timbered houses with sagging rooftops, until you approach a stone building near the edge of the village. This is the local infirmary, perhaps the most advanced medical center the town has to offer. Inside, a monk in a brown robe prepares his tools. He is not a doctor by modern standards, but here, in this world, he is the best hope for the sick. To understand medieval medicine, we must first let go of everything we know about science. There were no microscopes, no understanding of bacteria or viruses, no antibiotics, no anesthesia. The physicians of the Middle Ages relied on texts that were already ancient by their time writings, from Greek and Roman antiquity, especially from the likes of Hippocrates and Galen. These works were copied and recopied, preserved through centuries of reverence, but rarely questioned. Their words were treated more like scripture than science. When a patient in the Middle Ages complained of an ailment, let's say a headache, the cause was not sought in the brain, or in nerves, or in blood pressure. Instead, it was attributed to an imbalance in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These humors were thought to flow through the body like rivers, and when one became too dominant or too weak, illness followed. A headache might be caused by too much blood. The solution, bleeding, bloodletting, was one of the most common treatments in medieval medicine. Doctors, or more often barbers and monks, would either cut into veins with a small blade or apply leeches to draw the blood out more slowly. Patients would grow pale, dizzy, and weak. Some would faint, some would get infections, some would die, but the prevailing belief was that the removal of excess fluids would restore balance and therefore health. And if the patient worsened, perhaps the balance had not yet been achieved. Medicine and astrology were deeply intertwined. The stars and planets were believed to influence not only personality, but also physical health. Doctors consulted astral charts to determine when to bleed a patient or administer a remedy. If the moon was in a certain phase, or if Mars was in the wrong place in the sky, a treatment might be postponed or altered. Birth charts were studied as carefully as symptoms. A person born under the sign of Aries might be especially prone to fevers. A Virgo might suffer from stomach problems. These celestial patterns were more important than the body itself. Anatomy, too, was a murky subject. Religious prohibitions made human dissection rare and often illegal. Medical knowledge of the human body came largely from animal dissection, sheep, and occasionally apes. As a result, many anatomical ideas were completely wrong. The liver was believed to be the center of emotion. The heart was thought to produce heat that controlled digestion. The brain's purpose was poorly understood. Physicians made guesses based on ancient texts and animal comparison. They didn't know about circulation or how organs really worked, but still, they treated the human body with absolute authority, even in error. One popular method of healing was forced sweating. The belief was that illness came from corrupted humors or toxins that could be pushed out through the skin. Patients were wrapped in layers of blankets or placed in heated chambers until they sweated profusely. Herbs might be added to the steam. While the patient became dehydrated, dizzy, or even delirious, the healer would wait for signs of purification. Vomiting was also considered helpful. If the body expelled something, then surely it was getting better. Herbal remedies were widely used, but rather than choosing herbs based on their chemical effects, something they didn't understand, medieval healers chose them based on the doctrine of signatures. This was the belief that a plant's shape or color revealed its purpose. A walnut looks like a brain, so it must help with brain problems. Yellow flowers were used for jaundice. Red herbs were thought to treat blood disorders. Plants with thorns were used for pain. These treatments weren't based on trials or experiments, but rather on symbolism. It was a kind of medicinal poetry, misguided, but rich in meaning. Of course, not all knowledge was this crude. In the Islamic world, medicine had advanced much further. Hospitals in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo had scholars who studied anatomy, wrote encyclopedias, and made surgical instruments. But in most of Europe, especially in rural areas, disease was still seen as divine punishment. A sudden fever might be a test of faith. Epilepsy was sometimes believed to be possession, and if nothing else worked, prayer was the final remedy. Medicine was a blend of ritual, observation, and blind faith. Monks collected and grew herbs in garden plots. They recorded illnesses in manuscripts. They prayed over the sick. Sometimes they read scripture to ease pain. If a patient died, it was not because the treatment failed, but because God had other plans. Healing, in their view, was not only physical, but spiritual. Sin was a kind of disease, and illness a path to redemption. So the next time you feel a headache coming on, be thankful that you're not living in the year 1327. Be thankful you don't have to be bled, burned, steamed, or exorcised. Be thankful for aspirin, for clean water, for hand soap, for antibiotics, and maybe be thankful for boredom too. Now breathe deeply, let your body sink into stillness. The journey has just begun. And before we move on to the next part of our strange, sleepy history, take a moment to write in the comments how you're feeling. Sleepy, a little uneasy. I'm listening always. The room is dim. A small candle flickers, casting long shadows across the uneven stone walls. Outside, rain begins to tap gently against the window pane, a soft rhythm, steady and constant. Inside the makeshift medical chamber, perhaps a cell repurposed for healing, a man lies on a wooden cot. He is pale, feverish, shivering beneath layers of cloth. The healer by his side does not take his temperature, because the concept does not yet exist in any measurable sense. Instead, the healer places a hand against the man's forehead and closes his eyes, feeling for signs only he believes he understands. The diagnosis: a disturbance of the humors, most likely an excess of black bile, the fluid thought to cause melancholy and lethargy. The treatment begins with purging. A small bowl filled with a foul-smelling mixture of herbs and minerals is placed into the patient's hands. It is thick, muddy, and bitter. It may contain hellebore, a toxic plant thought to cleanse the bowels, or it could be powdered antimony, a metal used as a laxative, despite its tendency to poison. The patient drinks, the healer waits. Suffering is expected. Relief, however, is never guaranteed. Purging was a cornerstone of medieval therapeutic logic. If illness was caused by something inside the body, something spoiled, something corrupt, then it needed to come out, one way or another, through vomiting, defecation, sweating, or bleeding. The body was expected to shed its illness, sometimes all at once. Some healers would prescribe a regimen of all four in succession, a brutal cycle of physical depletion. And if the patient worsened, well, the illness must have been particularly stubborn. It was rarely the fault of the method. Even more disturbing were the treatments reserved for those deemed mentally unwell. Without an understanding of neurology, psychology, or trauma, mental illness in the Middle Ages was seen as a spiritual affliction, perhaps the work of demons. A mother who wept too often after childbirth might be diagnosed with demonic melancholy. A man who spoke to himself in the street could be accused of being possessed, and possession required one thing above all: expulsion. Exorcisms were a form of healing. The ritual varied from place to place, but generally involved a priest, sacred texts, holy water, and fear. The afflicted might be restrained, sometimes tied down for days. Loud prayers were shouted into their ears. Incense was burned until the air became unbreathable. In extreme cases, the demon might be beaten out of them with sticks or fists. And if the patient died during the process, it was a tragic but spiritually justified end. After all, the soul had been saved, but not all healing was so violent. In quieter corners of the medieval world, Folk medicine thrived. Village healers, often women, used recipes passed down through generations. These healers had no formal education. They couldn't read or write. But they understood the land, the seasons, the signs in the sky, and the subtle behaviors of plants. A poultice made from moss and honey might be used to clean a wound. A tea of lavender and mint to ease anxiety. These methods were not always effective, but some were surprisingly helpful, accidental discoveries that science would later verify. Yet, many of these women were accused of witchcraft. Knowledge without permission was dangerous. Healing without church sanction could look like sorcery. And then, there were the hospitals. But do not imagine modern wards filled with beds and nurses. Medieval hospitals were often little more than large halls, lined with straw mats or narrow wooden planks where the sick were kept together, not to be cured, but to be cared for as they died. Hospitals were more like hospices, a place for last prayers, confession, and quiet passing. The idea of isolating infectious patients had not yet fully developed. The sick shared bowls, blankets, air. Contagion spread like wildfire. Plague, typhus, dysentery, all flowed freely from one bed to the next. In some cities, hospitals were attached to religious orders. Nuns administered food and prayers. Monks cleaned wounds and changed linens, but they had little training. Their tools were primitive. Knives and saws boiled in water, if sterilized at all. Wounds cleaned with wine or vinegar. Limbs amputated without anesthesia. Screams echoed off cold stone walls, absorbed only by the silence of the sick who no longer had the strength to cry out. Surgery was a last resort, and the term surgery barely describes what occurred. There were no antiseptics, no painkillers, no blood transfusions. Patients were held down by assistants while a barber surgeon, yes, the same man who cut your hair, used iron tools to remove a tumor, or a gangrenous finger, or an arrow embedded too deeply to remove by hand. Wounds were cauterized with hot metal to stop the bleeding. The smell of burning flesh lingered for days. Those who survived the operation often died from infection later. And yet, medieval people did what humans have always done. They tried, they cared, they did the best they could with what they had, and what they believed. A father would give his last coin to buy rosemary for his feverish child. A mother would walk for miles to bring her sick baby to a convent healer. A young man wounded in battle would pray not for survival, but for a holy death. The will to live was strong, but the tools were weak. Outside the cities, in the forests and mountains, a different kind of medicine lingered. Herbalists who worked alone, quiet men and women who knew which roots to boil for pain, which mushrooms to avoid, which flowers to hang above the bed of the dying. They lived on the margins, sometimes feared, sometimes respected, sometimes burned. Death was everywhere, but so was healing, in its own way. Even if it didn't look the way we expect. A healer's touch, a whispered prayer, a bowl of hot broth, these were acts of hope in a hopeless world. Now the candle in the healer's room burns lower, the patient breathes more slowly. The rain has stopped. A new quiet settles in, soft and complete. Maybe he will wake, maybe not. But here, in this dark and distant past, healing was more than medicine. It was ritual. It was belief. It was mystery. And now, if you're still awake, let your body continue to drift. Let your mind wander gently across the stone paths of the medieval world. No need to rush. No need to move. Before we continue our journey, I invite you again to share in the comments how you're feeling. Still with me, still awake, or already fading into sleep. Either way, I'll be here, ready with part 3, whenever you are. The moon has risen now, pale and wide above the thatched rooftops of a medieval village. A low fog rolls through the fields beyond, silent and unbothered. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howls into the night, not out of hunger, but out of habit. Time, in this world, moves differently, slowly, cyclically, like a candle melting drip by drip, or a prayer whispered in rhythm with one's breath. In the heart of a small wooden cottage, an old woman kneels beside a child's bed. The child is sick. His skin is hot to the touch. His breath comes in short, uneven puffs. His eyes flutter beneath trembling lids. He has not eaten in days. The woman, his grandmother, does what she can. She dips a cloth into cool water and places it gently on his forehead. She lights dried sage to cleanse the air, and she begins to hum not a song, exactly, but a soft repetitive sound, like the swaying of tall grass in wind. Her healing, like most in the countryside, is improvised, intuitive, unwritten. Outside of cities and monasteries, rural folk practiced what we might call vernacular medicine. Rooted in generations of oral tradition, these customs were passed from mothers to daughters, from elders to apprentices, quietly, without books, without ceremony. These healers, sometimes called cunning folk or wise women, knew their local flora well. They knew which berries soothed the stomach and which caused sleep. They knew how to bind a wound with spiderwebs, or pack a burn with crushed comfrey root. Some remedies worked, some did not, but all were delivered with care. Still, suspicion followed them. In times of hardship, when crops failed or infants died, these very same healers might be accused of bringing harm rather than help. If a fever worsened after a village woman laid hands on the sick, whispers might turn to accusations. She must have cursed him. She must have used the wrong herbs on purpose. The line between healing and heresy was thin, and it could move without warning. To treat illness without church blessing was to invite danger in medieval law, especially during the later centuries. Healing practices outside of sanctioned medicine became increasingly criminalized. The church, and often the crown, attempted to control the practice of medicine by granting licenses only to certain individuals, usually men who had trained in university settings, or clergy trusted by the ecclesiastical hierarchy. This meant that even effective folk healers could be declared illegal practitioners, or worse, witches. The concept of the witch, by this time, had become a strange fusion of folklore, superstition, and fear. A healer who gathered herbs by moonlight could be considered a wise woman, or an agent of the devil depending on the outcome of her next treatment. If a child recovered after drinking her tea, she was praised. But if that same child took a turn for the worse, the tea might be labeled a potion. Evidence, after all, was rarely objective, it was emotional. And fear is a powerful force. In cities, medical practice was evolving slowly and unevenly. Universities began to emerge in the 12th and 13th centuries, such as those in Bologna, Paris, and Oxford. Here, the sons of wealthy families studied the works of Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, and other classical thinkers. The curriculum was theoretical, not practical. Students read about anatomy, but rarely saw it. They memorized descriptions of diseases, but did not treat patients. Still, these university-trained physicians gained status, and as their reputations grew, so did their authority over who could heal and who could not. These learned men dressed in long robes and pointed hats, often more symbolic than functional. They prescribed treatments from behind closed doors, rarely examining their patients directly. A common approach was to study the patient's urine. Color, smell, and even taste were analyzed to determine which humor was dominant. A reddish hue might indicate too much blood. A dark yellow might suggest excess bile. A cloudy appearance could point to phlegm. And so, medicine was practiced by inference. Doctors might prescribe a cooling regimen, rest in a shaded room, consumption of cool and moist foods, like cucumbers or fish, or a heating treatment, spicy wines, cinnamon baths. But for the poor, these prescriptions were unreachable. A peasant with a broken leg could not afford saffron or cinnamon. He could not rest for weeks in a clean bed. So, once again, he turned to local knowledge, to the midwife, the blacksmith, the wise woman, and when all else failed, he prayed. Prayer was not just spiritual comfort, it was a treatment. Medieval medicine blurred the lines between science, religion, and magic. Illness was often interpreted as punishment for sin, for pride, for failure to observe a feast day. In this view, repentance could heal. Pilgrimage could cure saints, could intercede. Shrines to healing saints became major destinations for the ill and the desperate. The most famous of these, such as the Shrine of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury, drew thousands each year. Pilgrims walked for weeks, or even months, often barefoot, often sick, through forests and across rivers, hoping for a miracle. They brought Offerings, candles, coins, tokens of their suffering. They waited in long lines to touch relics, or bathe in sacred water, or be blessed by a priest. And sometimes, people did get better. Perhaps by chance, perhaps by faith, perhaps because belief itself can soothe pain in ways we do not fully understand. Back in the cottage, the child stirs. His fever is not gone, but it has broken slightly. The woman adjusts the cloth on his brow. She sings a little louder now, hopeful. The shadows on the wall stretch long, and somewhere beyond them, morning approaches. Soon, the rooster will crow. Soon, the day will begin again. But in this quiet moment, under the watch of stars and flickering candlelight, we see that even in darkness, healing continues, not with precision or certainty, but with love. Let yourself rest now. There is more to explore, but not all at once. Close your eyes. Imagine the rhythm of that old woman's hum. Soft, repeating, familiar. Let it carry you deeper into sleep, if sleep has not already come. Or simply let your thoughts drift like the fog outside her window. Slow, wandering, peaceful. The village awakens slowly. Morning fog clings low to the fields, brushing gently against the stalks of barley and the damp stone walls of cottages that lean slightly, like they too are still drowsy. Inside, the scent of smoldering embers lingers. From the fire that kept the family warm overnight, a pot hangs above the hearth, empty for now, waiting for the first water of the day to boil. Chickens shuffle outside in the cold grass. A cart creaks down a muddy path. And somewhere, already, someone is ill. There is always someone ill in the medieval world. Illness was not rare, was constant. A cough might never leave you. A sore throat could last for months. A child's fever might come and go, unpredictably. Like the moon, even the healthiest among them were never entirely well. Parasites were common, dental infections widespread, skin diseases frequent. Most lived with a quiet ache in the joints, or an occasional swelling behind the eyes. It was simply the nature of life, just another thread in the fabric of existence. But not all diseases were quiet. Some roared like storms. Among these few were feared more than leprosy. Leprosy, known today as Hansen's disease, was a terrifying presence in medieval society. Its signs were misunderstood, its cause unknown, and its victims often exiled. A person who developed visible symptoms, numb skin lesions, disfigurement was often cast out, declared unclean. The disease was believed to be both highly contagious and spiritually symbolic, a punishment for sin, a visible marker of divine judgment. The leper became not just a patient, but a warning. Leper colonies were formed small communities, often at the edge of towns or in the wilderness, where those afflicted could live apart. Sometimes they were maintained by monasteries or religious orders. Sometimes they were simply left alone, provided with alms, but no companionship. Those entering a leper colony might undergo a symbolic funeral. Their old life, it was said, was over. They were now the living dead, and yet they lived on. Some for years, some for decades. Some even found peace. The treatments, of course, were ineffective. Leprosy could not be cured with the ointments, salves, and prayers offered. Physicians might recommend fumigating the body with herbs, bathing in sulfur water, or wearing amulets inscribed with protective verses. These rituals were not science. They were hope, painted with the colors of fear and superstition. The true relief, if it came at all, came from within the leper communities themselves, where kindness and acceptance still sometimes grew. But if leprosy terrified by degrees slowly, visibly tragically, other diseases struck like lightning. Consider the plague. When the Black Death arrived in Europe in the mid-14th century, it brought with it not only death but panic, confusion, and the total unraveling of medical authority. Within a few short years, tens of millions were dead. Entire villages vanished. Fields lay unplowed. Churches went silent. Graves were dug in haste, sometimes in layers, the dead stacked like wood. The air itself was feared. Breathing became dangerous. Faces were covered. People fled their homes. Mothers abandoned children. Priests refused last rites. Doctors, those who remained, were overwhelmed. Many died in the early waves. Others adopted strange garb in a desperate attempt to protect themselves. The beaked plague mask became an iconic symbol, a long bird-like face filled with dried herbs, intended to filter out the miasma, the bad air thought to carry the disease. The eyes were covered in glass. The cloak was waxed and long. In this costume, the doctor resembled something between a scavenger and a specter, moving from body to body like death itself. But their treatments, largely futile. Some recommended bloodletting to draw out the poison. Others advised smoking aromatic woods indoors. Vinegar was used to wash coins and clothing. Some towns burned aromatic herbs in public squares. Others banned bathing, fearing that open pores allowed the disease inside. Flagellants roamed the countryside, whipping themselves in the streets, hoping to appease a wrathful god. And yet, the plague returned again and again, not once but multiple times over centuries. Each wave a new nightmare. Survival was random. Some escaped with no symptoms. Others died within hours. Families were lost. Histories were erased. And still after the storm, life returned. The markets reopened. Fields were replanted. Children were born. Memory, as always, faded. Yet even in calmer years, medicine remained harsh. Bleeding was still common. A visit to the local barber surgeon could mean the application of leeches too. Your arms or legs. The leeches were kept in small, dark jars, and sold by merchants who claimed to know their origins. Some said leeches gathered from marshes beneath moonlight were straddest. The patient sat still as the slimy creatures latched on, sucking blood slowly and silently. It was said to balance the humors, to draw out heat, to calm the spirit. In truth, it mostly caused anemia and infection. Cupping was another practice. Small cups, glass or horn, were heated and then placed on the skin, forming suction as they cooled. This raised circular welts on the body. Practitioners claimed it drew out impurities, toxins, bad spirits. Patients often felt weak afterward, but considered that a sign of success. And then there was trepanation, a procedure older than recorded history. Trepanation involved drilling a hole into the skull to relieve pressure, expel evil spirits, or treat seizures. Medieval versions were crude. A patient held down or drugged with alcohol had the top of their skull pierced with a metal tool. If they survived the operation, and many did not, they were left with a permanent opening in the head, sometimes covered with a thin piece of silver or copper. Evidence suggests some patients lived for years afterward. But why? Perhaps the pressure in their skull was genuinely relieved. Or perhaps it was just another desperate gamble in an age without answers. And all this time, the common people carried on. They worked in fields, washed clothes in rivers, tended to animals, raised children. When illness came, they did what they could. They used garlic for infections. They drank wine as antiseptic. They turned to saints, to charms. To each other, the line between science and magic was never clear. A farmer might carry a small stone said to protect against fever. A mother might tie herbs around her baby's cradle. A widow might visit a crossroads at midnight, leave a token, and whisper a wish to the wind. These were not medical acts, strictly speaking, but they were acts of care, of protection, of belief. In a world without modern medicine, belief was often the strongest tool they had. Outside, the fog begins to lift. The sun rises thin and pale through the clouds, casting long light across the thatched roofs and muddy roads. A rooster calls once, then again. Life begins its cycle once more, and as you lie there now, letting your breath slow, maybe you hear the echo of those centuries in your own body. The quiet strength it takes to endure without certainty. The softness that survives even in the hardest times. Let your thoughts move slowly now. Let the images fade, dissolve like morning mist. If sleep hasn't found you yet, it soon will. And if your eyes are still open, you can always share how you're feeling in the comments. Still awake, still with me, or already drifting. The day carries on, unhurried. Clouds drift across a pale blue sky, their shadows moving slowly over the open fields, over monastery walls, over narrow dirt roads lined with hedgerows and timber-framed houses. The world smells of damp earth, old wood, and distant fires. You can almost hear the steady creak of a cartwheel turning, the lowing of a cow in the distance. the quiet murmur of monks walking in procession behind stone cloisters. It is a world half asleep, wrapped in the haze of candle smoke and time. Not far from the edge of a town, perched on a low hill, is a small priory. The stone is weathered, the bell tower short and round. Inside, the halls are quiet, save for the occasional echo of sandals on flagstone. This is not just a house of prayer, it is a house of healing. Monasteries in the medieval period were often among the few places where structured care was available, though the medicine practiced here was limited and often based on spiritual principles. Monks and nuns maintained infirmaries rooms for the sick, the dying, the exhausted. Their goal was not always to cure, but to comfort, to ease pain, to prepare the soul. The monastic infirmarian, usually an older monk with years of experience, might tend to patients with quiet precision. He would clean wounds with warm water, steeped in herbs like yarrow and chamomile. He might apply salves, made from beeswax, lard, and ground bark. He would read aloud from sacred texts, or place relics near the ill bones of saints, fragments of cloth, pieces of old wood believed to be from the true cross. All were considered instruments of healing. The monastery garden was more than a place of beauty, it was a pharmacy. Rows of carefully tended plants grew in quiet abundance: sage, lavender, rosemary, rue, wormwood, angelica, fennel, horehound, hyssop. Each had its uses, its season, its preparation method. The monks kept books, hand-copied manuscripts, that listed these plants and their applications. Some drew from ancient texts, like Dioscorides de Materia Medica, or Galen's on the Elements, according to the teaching of Hippocrates. These works were considered foundational, even sacred. But much was lost in translation. Much was misunderstood. Still, there was care in the process. The leaves were dried carefully, roots were boiled slowly, salves were stirred for hours over low flames. Even if the cures were ineffective, the ritual of making them held power. There is comfort in routine, in the feel of mortar and pestle in one's hands, in the rhythm of Latin chants, echoing through stone halls as the sick lie quietly in their beds. Outside the walls of monasteries, medical texts also circulated, but they were rare and expensive. Most were written in Latin, limiting them to the educated elite. A noble household might have 1 or 2 books of remedies, kept under lock and key, read only by the steward or the household physician. One such book, the Trotula, written in the 11th or 12th century, offered guidance on women's health. It was one of the few texts to recognize that female bodies had unique medical needs, though its explanations, by modern standards, were deeply flawed. Still, it offered something: recognition, however limited, that not all patients were the same. Women in medieval medicine occupied a strange space, often excluded from formal study, yet essential in practice. Midwives, in particular, played a central role in the life and death of communities. They delivered babies, cared for mothers, managed complications as best they could. They had no licenses, no official status, but their knowledge was vast. It had to be. Childbirth was one of the most dangerous experiences a woman could endure. There were no surgical tools as we know them today, no antiseptic, no anesthesia. If a baby was breached, or the mother began to hemorrhage, the midwife did what she could with herbs, with whispered prayers, with her hands. Sometimes it was enough, sometimes not. Many women died in childbirth. Many infants did not survive. Their first week, the church developed rituals to bless both mother and child. Baptism was often performed immediately after birth, in case death came swiftly, and sometimes it did. The medieval world was steeped in death, yet not devoid of joy. People still sang lullabies, they still hoped, they still loved. It is a mistake to imagine the past as cold or numb. The pain may have been constant, but so was the tenderness. A mother brushing her child's hair with a carved comb. A father whittling toys from scrap wood. A grandmother humming a song her mother once sang. To her, these moments existed. They mattered, perhaps more than any medicine. And yet, when death did come, it came with ritual. The process of dying was guided not just by family, but by the church. The ars moriendi, or art of dying, was a tradition that developed in the late medieval period. It was both a spiritual guide and a social script. The dying were encouraged to confess their sins, reject temptation, forgive enemies, and accept death with grace. The family gathered, candles were lit, prayers were whispered, the last rites were given. The soul was prepared for its journey. Physicians, if present, could do little more than observe. Death was not an enemy to be conquered, it was a passage. And medicine, in this view, was not so much about extending life as helping it end properly. Even after death, the body was cared for, washed, dressed, prayers continued. In wealthier homes, the corpse might be displayed for a day or two, allowing mourners to say goodbye. In cities, special guilds oversaw burial rituals, ensuring that even the poorest were not buried in haste. Graves were dug with care, and marked with stones or crosses or nothing at all. The dead lay beside their ancestors, and life went on above them through all of this. The thread of medicine continued, twisting, wandering, evolving. Some physicians began to push against the boundaries of church doctrine. They sought to understand anatomy through dissection, though it was rarely allowed. They questioned Galen, they experimented. Slowly, painfully, knowledge advanced. But even in the 15th century, long after the Black Death, long after the first great universities, most people still relied on the old ways, on herbs, on charms, on hope. Now, centuries later, we know so much more. We have antibiotic scans, surgery, vaccines, and yet, there is something humbling in remembering how much was once unknown, how much was endured, how deeply people hoped, even in the absence of certainty. Let your breath soften now. Imagine yourself standing in that monastery garden. The herbs rustle in the wind. The sun warms the stones beneath your feet. Bees drift from flower to flower. Somewhere a bell rings, not urgently, just marking the hour. Everything moves slowly, gently, as if the world itself has paused to breathe. The sun has passed its peak now, and long angled shadows stretch across cobbled roads and stone walls covered in moss. The air has softened, it is warm, but not hot, filled with the earthy scent of old wood, drying herbs, and horses at rest. Somewhere in the distance, a wooden wheel turns, a bucket descends into a well. A sparrow hops across the edge of a windowsill, peering inside at a small bowl of crushed garlic and vinegar. This, too, is medicine. Garlic, though common and humble, was believed to hold powerful curative properties. It was crushed and steeped in wine to make a tonic for the heart, applied as a poultice for wounds, even carried in pockets to ward off illness. Vinegar, meanwhile, was not just a flavoring or preservative, was a cleanser, a ritual tool, a disinfectant before disinfection was understood. Monks used it to wash their hands. Plague doctors soaked their robes in it. Mothers dabbed it behind children's ears. These practices were not born of modern science, but of observation. When little could be explained, people learned from what they could see. A wound that smelled less foul when washed in vinegar seemed to heal better. A cough that eased after hot broth with garlic was noted, remembered, repeated. Knowledge passed from mouth to ear, from hand to hand, slowly, silently, over time. In homes across Europe, the family healer was often the grandmother or the wise woman from the edge of town. She was not a physician. She did not write prescriptions. But she remembered. She remembered which plants grew best in spring, which leaves to boil for stomach aches, which roots to grind into powder. Her remedies might include fennel, to ease indigestion, elderflower to reduce fevers, or comfrey, known as bonnet, to speed the mending of fractures. Such women were revered and feared in equal measure. Some were respected members of the community, others were suspected of witchcraft. Their knowledge, practical, empirical, often effective, stood outside the boundaries of official learning. In times of desperation, they were sought out, but in times of fear, they could be accused, shunned, even executed. This fear reached its height during the later Middle Ages, as witch hunts spread across Europe. Women who healed without a license, or who practiced rituals that fell outside the church's teachings, could be denounced. A woman with dried herbs hanging in her home might be accused of casting spells. A widow who lived alone and spoke to animals might be said to consort with demons. Some were tortured into confessing, others were burned. And still, in the quiet hours between fear and law, many continued their work gathering plants, grinding powders, whispering blessings. The world of medicine was, in truth, a mosaic of contradictions. Learned men debated Galen's theories in universities, while barefoot villagers rubbed rosemary on their temples and hoped for sleep. Monks transcribed ancient texts in careful Latin script, while field hands chewed willow bark to dull a toothache. Lords summoned physicians who read the stars before offering a diagnosis, while peasants simply bled the afflicted and hoped for balance. Astrology and medicine, too, were intertwined. A physician might consult a chart before performing any treatment. The moon's phase, the alignment of Mars and Saturn, the position of the sun, all were believed to influence the body's humors. A bleeding might be delayed until the stars were favorable. A birth might be predicted, a fever explained, by the movement of the heavens. The zodiac signs were linked to parts of the body: Aries to the head, Taurus to the neck, Pisces to the feet. Charts were drawn, consulted, copied. In some cases, patients would not be treated at all unless the stars aligned properly. This was not neglect, but protocol. To act against the stars was to risk disaster, and so, time itself became a part of healing. Waiting was medical, delaying was wise. Illness was not always fought directly, was endured, with patience, ritual, and prayer. The physicians of the period, those formally trained, wore robes that marked their status. They studied for years, often in universities in Italy, France, or England. But their education was rooted in texts written over 1,000 years earlier. Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, names revered, words copied endlessly. Dissection was rare. Observation was limited. Much of what was believed about the body was theoretical. They believed, for instance, that the liver produced blood, that the heart warmed it, that illness came from imbalance, not from germs or viruses, but from internal misalignments of qualities: hot and cold, wet and dry. These qualities were mapped onto everything: food, emotions, seasons. A person with melancholy was said to be cold and dry. A fever was hot and moist. Treatment sought to oppose and restore. A fevered patient might be given something cold and dry, a powder of crushed pearls, or a broth with cooling herbs. Yet even as these theories failed to heal the sick, they provided structure, a map, and in a world full of pain, a map was better than nothing. Surgery, meanwhile, was left to the lower ranks: barbers, surgeons, who shaved beards, pulled teeth, set bones, and sometimes amputated limbs. Their tools were few, their experience variable. An amputation involved binding the limb tightly, then sawing through with a long blade. Cautery followed, a hot iron pressed to the stump to stop the bleeding. The pain was unimaginable. Some patients died from shock alone. Others lived, scarred, but alive. Infection was common, survival was uncertain. And yet some of these surgeons learned remarkable techniques: trepanation, wound cleansing, even rudimentary eye surgeries for cataracts. In the Islamic world, physicians were often more advanced, documenting procedures, designing instruments, debating ethics. Their texts filtered into Europe slowly, translated over decades. Medicine, like everything, moved in waves. Let your thoughts drift now. Imagine the steady scrape of a quill on parchment, the slow bubbling of a copper pot over a low fire, the rustle of a linen robe as a physician approaches a bedside. Not to heal, necessarily, but to observe, to advise, to speak gently. Healing, in this time, was less a science than a ceremony, a process. A gesture of hope, and hope, however small, was everything in a world where childbirth might take your life, where a small cut could become a fatal infection, where winters came hard and medicine came late. In that world, a gesture of kindness, a quiet word, a spoonful of broth, a simple prayer whispered by candlelight, all of it was medicine. Let your breath slow with the rhythm of this ancient world. You're still here, listening, still resting, maybe still awake, maybe not, and that's all right. The sky is turning a deeper shade of gray-blue now. Evening stretches slowly across the rooftops of thatched cottages and worn cathedrals. Candles are being lit in windows. The soft glow of firelight begins to flicker through shutters. A hush falls across the land, not silence, but a softness, the kind that comes when work is done and only rest remains. In a small house on the edge of a village, a child is coughing. The sound echoes through the close walls. Her mother sits nearby, soaking cloth in warm water with thyme and honey. It's all she has. It's all most people had. In the medieval world, illness was so common, so constant, that few homes were untouched by it. Fevers came with the change of seasons. Sores and rashes spread through families. Wounds turned black, lungs filled with fluid. A simple cold could become pneumonia. A bad meal could bring on days of agony. And without understanding bacteria or viruses, people turned to what they knew: herbs, warmth, prayer. The remedies varied by region, passed down from one generation to the next. In Northern Europe, juniper berries were boiled to cleanse the blood. In the South, figs were mashed and mixed with oil to treat boils. Cabbage leaves were applied to swollen joints. Onion and lard were mashed together and pressed to the chest to draw out a cough. None of these would stop a serious infection, but sometimes they soothed. Sometimes that was enough. Even in larger towns and cities, where physicians and apothecaries could be found, treatments were more guesswork than cure. A visit to the apothecary meant entering a cramped, dimly lit shop filled with glass vials, bundles of dried plants, jars of powder. The air was thick with scent: clove, myrrh, mint, resin. Shelves were packed with ingredients, some useful, some strange: crushed emeralds, dried lizard skins, ground pearls, powdered horn. Many believed that precious materials held healing power, especially when ingested in small amounts. The wealthier the patient, the more exotic the prescription. But, more often, the poor relied on their own resourcefulness. In villages and farms, healers and midwives created poultices from kitchen scraps, brewed teas from weeds, and rubbed aches with warm oils made from pig fat and rosemary. There was no certification, no license, just trust, or desperation. When all else failed, they turned to the saints. Saints were believed to intercede in matters of health and illness. Each one had a specialty. Saint Apollonia was called upon for toothaches, Saint Roch for plague, Saint Dymphna for mental illness. People carried their images in small lead or wooden tokens, known as pilgrimage badges. They hung them by beds, sewed them into clothing, pressed them to their skin during pain. In some churches, relics of saints were said to heal simply by proximity. A drop of blood, a sliver of bone, a piece of a saint's garment. Pilgrims walked for days, weeks to visit these sacred remains. They lit candles, they left offerings, they knelt, touched, wept, and hoped. The line between the spiritual and the physical was thin. Faith was medicine, to Dot in the same way. Dreams and visions were treated as diagnoses. A person who dreamed of fire might be told they had too much bile, too much heat in the body. A vision of water might suggest melancholy, a flooding of black bile. The interpretation of dreams was not frivolous. It was diagnostic. Some healers kept dream books, guides to help decipher what the unconscious might be saying about the body. These were not necessarily medical dreams in the modern sense, but spiritual messages, woven into the fabric of illness. Likewise, sin was often seen as a source of sickness. A guilty conscience could bring about disease. It was believed. This wasn't always cruel or accusatory. Sometimes it offered a way to understand suffering in a world with so few answers. If a man fell ill, he might be asked what sins he carried. If a woman's child grew weak, she might be urged to confess and pray. Healing became an act of spiritual reconciliation. In many hospitals, often run by monasteries, the soul was treated more attentively than the body. Patients received communion, heard mass, confessed. Their beds were placed near chapels. Psalms were read aloud. The assumption was that healing the soul might restore the flesh, and if not, if death came, then at least the patient would die. In a state of grace, medicine, in this world, was inseparable from belief. Even among the learned, this was true. Medical texts were copied and preserved in monasteries, because they were seen as part of God's creation. The body was a divine design. To study it, to tend it, was not science, it was devotion. That's why so many early physicians were also clergy. They saw no contradiction between faith and anatomy, between healing and prayer. But even belief had its limits. When the plague struck, belief faltered. The Black Death, beginning in the 14th century, swept across Europe with terrifying speed. Entire towns emptied. Families collapsed. The symptoms were brutal: fever, swelling, darkened skin, bleeding from the nose. Physicians were helpless. Priests fled. Bodies piled in the streets, desperate to make sense of it. People blamed the air, bad air, or miasma, rising from the earth. They blamed the stars. They blamed their sins. And they blamed their neighbors, particularly those who were different. Pogroms spread alongside the plague, killing thousands of Jews who were falsely accused of poisoning wells. Plague doctors emerged from this. You're not the grim, bird-masked figures of popular imagination just yet, but earlier versions. Men who covered their faces, stuffed herbs in their garments, carried canes to avoid touching the sick. They could do little more than take notes. Their records, however, became some of the first attempts at medical observation pattern tracking. Early epidemiology, of a kind. Eventually, the plague passed. But the trauma remained, and with it, a lingering distrust of medicine, of the body, of the unseen. People resumed their rituals, their herbal cures, their prayers. But something had shifted slowly. A few began to ask deeper questions. A few dared to observe more closely. The body was no longer just a vessel of sin or humors, it was a mystery worth solving. Let your breath deepen now. Slowly you're walking through an old stone hall, one torch flickering on each wall. Dust floats in the air. You see a wooden door, slightly ajar, a book open on a desk. The parchment is yellowed, the ink is faded. You read the words, "Healing begins in humility." That was the truth for most of history. Medicine was not power. It was not certainty. It was an offering, a guess, a kindness in the face of pain. If you're still awake and still here, take a moment to share where your mind is wandering. Are you floating through candlelit monasteries, kneeling in a chapel, walking through fields of lavender and sage? Night has fully arrived now. The sky above the medieval town is dark, except for the faint silver glint of stars pushing through the clouds. The streets have quieted. The last candlelight flickers behind thick wooden shutters. A dog barks once, distantly, then nothing. Inside a small cottage, not far from the town square, a man lies awake, coughing softly into a cloth. His wife sits at his side, dipping a spoon into a bowl of warm barley water. She does not expect a miracle. She only hopes for comfort. This is what medicine looked like for most people in the Middle Ages. Not great discoveries or grand hospitals, but small acts of care, a cool cloth, a whispered prayer, a warm hand across a fevered brow. And while the learned physicians spoke Latin and debated the movements of bile and phlegm, it was usually family of women who bore the weight of healing. In every village, every household, someone held the memory of what to do when illness struck, how to treat a burn, how to ease a cramp, how to recognize the signs of a wound going bad. Yet even these small acts were colored by belief, by ritual, by fear. Superstition lingered around every sick. It wasn't foolishness, it was an effort to understand suffering in a world where so little could be explained. People tied charms to the bedposts. They placed bowls of water beneath the bed to absorb bad spirits. They hung animal teeth or carved symbols above doors to ward off illness. Certain days were believed to be unlucky for medical procedures. Certain moon phases were avoided entirely. Even the materials of medicine had a touch of magic to them. Mercury, though deadly, was used to treat skin conditions. Lead was ground into powder for rashes. Gold leaf was swallowed to purify the blood. Bezoar stone-like objects found in animal stomachs were sold at great price as antidotes to poison. One of the more curious ingredients was mummy, actual human remains, ground and consumed. Mumia, as it was called, was believed to contain potent healing power. Traders imported what they claimed were genuine Egyptian mummies, though many were simply dried corpses of criminals. The powder was mixed with honey or wine and used to treat everything from headaches to epilepsy. Why did people do this? Not out of cruelty, but out of hope, out of desperation. When the body fails, the mind searches. It latches onto whatever might offer relief. And in the absence of science, mystery filled the void. There was also bloodletting, still widely practiced. Bloodletting was based on the theory that excess humors caused illness. To restore balance, a physician or barber surgeon would open a vein, usually at the elbow or ankle, and let the blood flow into a bowl. The amount varied, sometimes only a few ounces. Other times, much more charts were consulted to determine which vein to open, depending on the illness. For a headache, perhaps a vein near the forehead. For liver trouble, one closer to the ribs. Even the time of day and the astrological sign under which the bleeding took place were believed to matter. Cupping and leeching were alternatives to cutting. Glass or metal cups, heated and placed on the skin, would draw blood to the surface. Leeches too were used, not just for removing blood, but believed to draw out the bad humors directly. Physicians kept leeches in jars, feeding them before use. They became common tools in the medieval medical kit, and yet, in spite of the fear and the filth and the flawed theories, something tender persisted, a deep, almost sacred respect for the suffering of the human body. There was no illusion that life was easy. Everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest monk, knew pain. They saw it in their neighbors, felt it in their own limbs. Death was never far. So medicine, even when ineffective, was infused with solemnity. This reverence can be seen in the hospitals built during the later medieval period. These were not hospitals in the modern sense. They were more like almshouses, places of shelter and rest, often founded by religious orders. Patients might be sick, or poor, or elderly. Care was offered not necessarily to cure, but to comfort. Beds lined long halls. Altars stood nearby. Meals were simple. Walls were decorated with images of saints. Everything reminded the patient that they were not alone. There were specialized institutions. To leprosariums, for example. Leprosy, now known as Hansen's disease, was one of the most feared illnesses of the age, not because it was fast-moving or always fatal, but because it changed the body in ways that were visible and frightening. Skin lesions, numbness, deformity. In a deeply religious world, such outward signs were often interpreted as punishment or moral failing. Lepers were often separated from society, not just for health reasons, but to protect the spiritual and social order. They wore special clothing. They rang bells to signal their approach. And yet, in many places, they were not abandoned entirely. Monasteries and guilds sometimes supported them. Some towns built small leper houses outside their walls. Even in exclusion, there was a form of care. As you breathe slowly now, imagine walking the long stone corridors of one such hospital. The walls are cool. The air smells of beeswax and old wood. You hear the soft chant of monks in a nearby chapel. A nurse, perhaps a lay sister, moves quietly between beds. She carries a bowl of porridge, gently coaxing a tired patient to eat. There is no cure, but there is presence. And sometimes, that was all that could be given. Midwives too carried this same blend of knowledge and compassion. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was a perilous journey. Many women did not survive it. Even healthy pregnancies could end suddenly. An infection was common, yet midwives, often older women who had borne children themselves, held vast stores of wisdom. They knew how to position a laboring mother, how to breathe through the pain, how to cut the cord and tie it, how to recognize danger. Their tools were simple: linen cloths, herbal salves, hot water, but their role was profound. They ushered new life into the world. They sang prayers. They held hands. They witnessed miracles and tragedies in equal measure. In some regions, midwives were respected. In others, they were watched with suspicion, especially as church and state began to regulate birth more closely. But despite official scrutiny, they continued. They were needed. And in the dim light of early morning, with the cries of a newborn still echoing, they were often the first to smile. You are still here, gently breathing, eyes soft, mind resting. The world of medieval medicine was a strange blend of fear and familiarity, suffering and solace, ignorance and care. There were no guarantees, no antibiotics, no X-rays or vaccines, but there was effort, there was kindness, there was ritual. And in every broken bone, every bleeding wound, every fevered child, someone tried, however imperfectly, to help. If you're still with me, and still awake, you can tell me how you're feeling down below. Is your mind floating through stone corridors? Are you feeling the warmth of candlelight, or simply drifting, gently, into silence? It is now long past midnight. The stars have settled overhead like quiet sentinels, scattered across the velvet sky. The earth below breathes slowly, heavily. The hum of life in the village has faded to near silence. Just the soft creak of timber in the cold and the distant murmur of an owl in the trees. Inside a timber-framed cottage, nestled at the edge of the forest, a healer sits by the hearth. She has no formal title, no books, no parchment with inked diagrams of the body. But she knows what her mother taught her, and what her grandmother taught before that. She gathers roots and leaves at dawn. She dries them in bundles that hang from the rafters. She brews teas in heavy iron pots. She listens to the body, and to the land. People call her when no one else knows what to do. This kind of healer was neither entirely trusted, nor entirely shunned. She lived in the spaces between medicine and magic, between village and wilderness, between accepted and feared. And many of her remedies worked, though no one could say quite why. Valerian root to ease nightmares, yarrow to stop bleeding, wormwood to fight worms, lavender for calm, sage for strength. Her tools were her hands, her memory, her senses. She watched the way a wound changed color, listened to the way a breath caught in the chest, smelled the sourness of an infection. Her medicine was tactile, intimate. It involved touch, and time, and stillness. She whispered to the sick. She prayed softly. She boiled water and held a child's hand while the fever ran its course. She was not a doctor, but for many she was the only hope. And yet the church often regarded women like her with unease. If her remedies worked too well, or if they failed catastrophically, she might be accused of sorcery. Healing in the wrong hands could be suspicious, especially if it seemed to blur the line between the natural and the unnatural. That line was always thin. In medieval Europe, the supernatural was part of daily life. Illness could be caused by a demon, a curse, a restless ghost. It could be the punishment for a broken vow, or the result of a jealous neighbor's evil eye. Medicine could help, but sometimes only if it addressed the spiritual cause as well. This is why so many treatments included charms or blessings. Why certain prayers were recited not only at Mass but over wounds and water and food. The body was not an isolated thing. It was part of a web of sin, of holiness, of unseen forces. Sometimes, healing rituals became highly elaborate. There were recipes for protective ointments made of 9 herbs, each gathered under specific conditions. There were ceremonies for driving out fever, involving chants, incense, and symbolic gestures. There were instructions in old manuscripts for transferring illness from a person to an objective in a wax figure, or a piece of cloth, and burying it or burning it under moonlight. These rituals were not silly to the people who performed them. They were careful acts of trust. Belief was part of the medicine. The ritual was not merely performance, it was participation. A way to connect the healer, the sick person, the divine, and the natural world. But there were others too. Those who approached medicine differently. In monasteries across Europe, monks and nuns studied healing more systematically. Their libraries held ancient texts, many translated from Greek and Arabic. They copied works by Hippocrates, Galen, and Ovid. They grew herbs in orderly gardens. They recorded symptoms and remedies in neat, looping script. Their hospitals were modest, but structured. Patients were examined, their diets adjusted, their bowels purged if necessary. Bleeding was performed according to the rules of humoral theory. Baths were given, and the pulse was felt, though its meaning was poorly understood. Clean linens, warm broths, and gentle care were the norm. And when death approached us, it so often did, the sick were given last rites. Their souls prepared for the next world, even if their bodies could not be saved in this one. It was during this time that the earliest seeds of anatomical study were planted. Some brave physicians, mostly in Italy, began to question what lay beneath the skin. They sought to understand the structure of the body, not just by guessing or reading ancient texts, but by looking. Dissection, though controversial and often restricted, began to emerge as a tool for learning. In candlelit rooms, with hushed voices and a mixture of awe and discomfort, they peeled back the layers of muscle and sinew. They examined organs, heart, liver, spleen with fascination. They made drawings, careful and detailed. They began to see the body not just as a vessel for sin or spirit, but as a machine, complex, logical, wabl, and yet, even these early anatomists still believed in humors, still believed in astrology, still saw illness through a spiritual lens. Medicine was not yet science. It was still closer to philosophy. The tension between knowledge and belief would continue for centuries. In the meantime, life continued. People lived, people suffered, people died, and still they tried to heal. In castles, the nobility summoned trained physicians who mixed exotic compounds and referenced stars before diagnosis. In villages, the poor sought help from those who had no formal titles, just wisdom passed down through generations. On battlefields, soldiers were tended by barber surgeons with bone saws and crude tools, who worked fast, without anesthesia, and hoped for the best. The barber surgeon was a figure of practical, if grisly, necessity. While physicians diagnosed and prescribed, barber surgeons did the work that required hands cutting, sewing, setting bones, lancing abscesses. Their shops were marked by red and white poles, symbols of blood and bandages. They shaved beards, they pulled teeth, they bled patients, drained cysts, and sometimes even performed amputations. There was no real pain management, no antiseptic, no concept of germs. A wound that didn't kill quickly might still fester and claim a life days later. Infection was always waiting, just beneath the surface. And yet, some survived, bodies healed, scars formed. Life, fragile and stubborn, carried on now. Let your breath slow again. Inhale, exhale. You are walking along a quiet riverbank, near a monastery garden. You smell rosemary and sage. A gentle wind rustles the herbs. A monk bends down, clipping lavender with a small blade. He sees you and smiles. You do not need to speak. He understands. You are only passing through. Let the stillness of that place surround you now. The deeper you go into this world, the more you begin to realize medieval medicine was not merely primitive. It was layered, ritualistic, rooted in a kind of reverence that modern medicine often forgets. It was flawed, yes, sometimes dangerous, but it was also deeply human. If you're still awake, or if you're just floating somewhere between thought and rest, you're doing exactly what people did then, seeking quiet in a world full of noise. The sky outside begins to lighten ever so slightly. Not dawn yet, just a subtle softening of the darkness, as if the night itself is beginning to exhale. In the stillness of these final hours, everything feels slower, deeper. It is a time when thoughts blur with dreams and history begins to shimmer like mist. In this quiet hour, we travel again, this time to a small stone church nestled in the heart of a countryside village. The building is old, even in the Middle Ages, with weathered arches and crumbling mortar. Ivy crawls along its sides. Inside, a single candle burns before a statue of a Saint Sebastian, protector against plague. Plague, a word heavy with memory. In the mid-14th century, the world changed. What had been whispers of disease from distant shores became a howl that swept across Europe with terrifying speed. The Black Death. It arrived in 1347 and stayed for years. By the time it passed, it had killed millions. Whole villages were emptied. Fields grew wild. Silence replaced song. No one was spared, not peasants, not kings, not clergy. To those living through it, the plague seemed like the end of days. No one knew what caused it. Some blamed miasma, bad air rising from swamps, or corrupted winds. Others believed it was the wrath of God, a punishment for sin. Still others blamed outsiders, witches, or planetary alignments. The true cause, pestis, a bacterium spread by fleas and rodents, was invisible and unknown. The symptoms were unmistakable. First, fever, then chills, then the telltale swellings, buboes, blackened lumps in the armpits or groin, then vomiting, delirium, dark rashes. Death often came within days, sometimes within hours. Physicians were helpless. Their usual tools, blood, herbal poultices, purgatives, did nothing. And so, the people turned to ritual. Processions moved through cities, with flagellants whipping themselves in penance. Church bells rang day and night. Prayers were said endlessly. In some towns, mass graves were dug, with bodies buried without rites. The living feared even to touch the dead. In the face of such horror, medical practice fractured. Some fled. Wealthy physicians abandoned cities for the countryside. Others stayed, risking their lives. A few attempted to document what they saw. Boccaccio in Florence wrote of friends abandoning friends, mothers leaving sick children. The social fabric frayed. But even amid chaos, some tried to understand. The plague marked a shift in medical thought, not immediately, but eventually. It showed the limits of classical theory. It revealed how little anyone truly knew, and it planted the seeds of curiosity. If old knowledge had failed, perhaps new knowledge must be found. But in the 14th century, those changes were still far off. For now, healing remained a blend of hope and ritual. Doctors wore strange costumes, long black robes and beaked masks filled with herbs, meant to protect them from the stench of disease. The masks' glass eyes gave them an almost bird-like appearance. These plague doctors were feared and respected. Though they too could do little, they advised staying indoors, burning fragrant woods, holding sweet-smelling flowers beneath the nose, avoiding thoughts of sadness. In some cases, they lanced the buboes, or applied strange mixtures to the skin, neshes, crushed emerald, snake meat. Nothing worked, and yet people survived. Some, inexplicably, recovered. Others were simply spared. The reasons were unknown, and this uncertainty led to fear, but also to awe. Life felt more fragile, but also more precious. Every breath was a gift. As the plague faded, it left scars not only on bodies, but on minds and societies. But medicine, in its quiet way, began to change. It started with observation, careful notes, questions that had no answers yet, but needed asking. And slowly, the healing arts began to shift from belief toward inquiry. In cities like Padua and Bologna, universities grew. Anatomy became a subject of study. Dissection, once rare, was now more common. The body became a subject not of fear, but of fascination. Texts were revised, illustrations drawn, muscles, nerves, bones all examined, named, described. Still, progress was slow. There was no microscope, no germ theory, but knowledge layered itself slowly, like sediment in a river. And those layers would eventually build the foundation of modern medicine. For now, though, let's return to the quieter world, the older one. The one where a sick child sleeps in a straw bed while their mother recites a prayer, where a monk crushes mint in a mortar, hoping to ease the stomach of an ailing novice, where a tired physician rereads his copy of Galen by candlelight, still believing in humors, but beginning to wonder what else might be true. Let your breath soften again. You are now walking a narrow road, lined with cypress trees. The air is cool. The stones beneath your feet are worn smooth by centuries of travel. You pass a traveler leaning against a milestone, coughing gently, sipping from a leather flask filled with a bitter tonic made from gentian root. He nods to you. He is going to the next town, hoping someone there might know a cure. You walk on. You pass a stream, its water clear and cold. A woman kneels there, washing cloths stained with blood. Her sleeves are rolled. Her eyes are tired, but kind. She's been caring for her sister, who is recovering slowly. She believes in the power of comfort and patience. She believes in touch, and warmth, and prayer. You leave her behind and continue down the path. Ahead is a small wooden chapel. The door creaks open. Inside you find a shelf of herbal remedies, beeswax salves, dried rose hips, a flask of elder cordial. An old priest tends the collection. He doesn't charge. He simply nods and offers what he can. His knowledge is limited, but his heart is full. This, too, was medicine in the Middle Ages. A tapestry of people, places, beliefs, and hopes. No single story defines it. No one figure holds all the truth. But together, Their efforts formed a moat made not of certainty, but of persistence. Even in the darkest times, someone always tried, and that is something worth remembering. Even as you drift into sleep, if you're still with me, perhaps your eyes are growing heavy now, or perhaps you're already half asleep, imagining yourself in a quiet cloister, with warm stone beneath your back, and the smell of lavender on the breeze. If you're still awake, feel free to write below what you're thinking. Are you calm, curious, or just relaxed? The moon has long since passed its peak. The shadows have shifted. The earth has cooled. If you're still with me, your body may feel heavier now, more distant. Your thoughts may be drifting softly, like boats on a quiet river. And that's perfectly alright. Let's go back in time again, not far, just a little farther along the winding road of medieval medicine. We arrive at a different kind of space now. A place not quite a hospital, not quite a home. It is a leprosarium. Leprous afflicted with what was then called leprosy, now known more accurately as Hansen's disease, were often exiled from their communities, not necessarily out of cruelty, but out of fear. In the Middle Ages, leprosy was one of the most feared illnesses, not because it killed quickly, but because it did not. It lingered, it disfigured, and it isolated. People with leprosy were believed to be contagious, marked by God spiritually and physically unclean. In some towns, they were given a ceremonial funeral before being cast out, symbolically considered dead to society, though still very much alive. And yet, even they were not entirely forgotten. Leprosariums were built on the outskirts of towns and cities, often near crossroads or rivers. These were quiet, cloistered places, maintained by religious orders or charitable lay people. Patients were given food, shelter, and some form of basic care. Life was slow. Time passed in silence and in prayer. Suffering was considered purifying, pain redemptive. The treatments offered here were more spiritual than medicinal. Psalms were sung, mass was attended if one could walk. Holy water was sprinkled. Touch was limited. The sick often wore special robes and carried small wooden clappers to warn others of their approach. And yet, in these quiet spaces, a strange kind of peace sometimes grew. Friendships formed, gardens were tended, wounds were cleaned as best as they could be, pain was eased by small comforts, warm bowl of broth, a hymn sung softly. The feeling of morning sun on the skin, the idea of disease as punishment was slowly shifting, too. Some began to see illness as part of the human condition, not necessarily a divine curse, but a test, a burden, a trial that could bring the soul closer to God. And for those who suffered, this shift in perception mattered. It meant their existence still had meaning, that they were not abandoned. Let your breath deepen again. Inhale, and release. You are now walking through one of these leprosariums. The grass is damp. The air smells of thyme and chamomile. You hear birdsong in the hedgerow. A nurse older patient leads you down a corridor where light filters through arched windows. In the stillness, you can feel the weight of the place, not sorrow, just stillness. Later, in the 15th century, attention began to shift from spiritual care toward more practical forms of healing. While superstition remained, experimentation quietly increased, especially among apothecaries, who were a kind of bridge between physician and herbalist. The apothecary's shop was a place of smells and substances. Rows of clay pots, glass bottles filled with mysterious liquids, dried plants hanging from beams, mortar and pestles worn smooth with use, scales, ledgers, labels, written in Latin. It was not uncommon for an apothecary to prepare remedies for everything from toothache to melancholy. They sold tinctures made from wormwood, opium, mint, and mustard seed. They compounded syrups, lozenges, balms, and electuaries, thick pastes mixed with honey or vinegar, designed to be swallowed or smeared. Their knowledge was both empirical and inherited, part science, part tradition. They learned through apprenticeship, not through formal schooling, and often held more practical knowledge than the physicians who wrote prescriptions. Customer might walk in complaining of a heavy chest. The apothecary would ask a few questions, smell their breath, look at the color of their tongue, and prepare a mixture perhaps with licorice, fennel, and wine. There were substances that modern ears might recognize. chamomile, cinnamon, cardamom, cloves, and there were others, best left forgotten: dried toad, powdered bone, and various unnamed earths thought to hold magical or medicinal properties. Some worked, some didn't, but it was the beginning of pharmacology, a slow shift toward observation, refinement, and reproducibility. The idea that substances had consistent effects on the body and could be studied systematically. Elsewhere, in more elite settings, medical manuscripts were becoming more refined. Books like De Quinum Sanitatis, translated from Arabic medical texts, offered illustrated guides to health and hygiene. These works were not only concerned with disease, but with balance, with daily life. They prescribed dietary rules, seasonal routines, and lifestyle advice. Good sleep, moderate exercise, balanced meals. Fresh air, things that still hold value today. These texts were part medical, part philosophical. They encouraged people not just to treat illness, but to live wisely enough to prevent it. But prevention in the Middle Ages was always at the mercy of circumstance. One bad winter could lead to famine. One bite from a flea could bring death. A poor cut with a dirty knife could end a life in days. Survival was never guaranteed, and yet people tried. They tried to live well, to eat right, to sleep through the night, to care for each other, to heal. And now, as you drift, you might imagine yourself in one of those manuscript illustrations, sitting beneath a tree in spring, eating bread, cheese, and figs. A light breeze carries the scent of basil. You have no pain, no fear, just peace. Let yourself rest here a while. You are safe. You are warm. You are surrounded by voices of the past, quiet ones that do not shout but whisper. They do not demand to be remembered. But you've remembered them anyway. Their hands made the medicines. Their minds asked the questions. Their hearts bore the burdens. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the growing divide between academic medicine and folk healing, between those who studied in universities and those who healed with instinct and tradition, between the clean marble halls of scholars and the smoky kitchens of midwives. But for now, sleep. If you're still with me, leave a word or two in the comments. Something simple, something honest, something human, just like the people we've met tonight. The air has grown even quieter now. If there is a breeze, it is barely felt. Even the trees seem to sleep. And you, too, may feel yourself sliding slowly, deeper into rest, into the soft cradle of stillness. This is the time of night when even thought moves like syrup and hurried, thick, warm. Let us walk together once more. This time, we are leaving behind the monasteries, the leprosariums, and the apothecary's shop. We are headed somewhere more hidden, a place without records, a place of whispered knowledge and practiced hands. We are going into the world of folk healers. These were the women, most often women, who did not wear robes or carry scrolls. They were not trained in universities. They did not speak Latin, but they knew things. They knew how to set a bone with surprising skill. They knew what herbs to steep in goat's milk to stop a fever. They knew the texture of yarrow leaves and the season to gather plantain. They knew when to chant and when to stay silent, when to lay a hand on the brow and when to stand back. They were midwives, herbalists, cunning folk, sometimes called wise women, sometimes called witches. But before that word was stained with fear, it was closer to a kind of respect. These women were part of the village, known by name, trusted. Their remedies came not from texts, but from generations of lived experience. Recipes passed from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter. A knowledge not written, but remembered. Some of their cures were of chamomile or elderflower for colds, mashed onion poultices for cough, lavender for restlessness. Others were more complex, preparing foxglove carefully to treat dropsy. Knowing the difference between healing and harming, they worked with what they had: plants, animals, minerals. They listened to the body. They read the skin, the eyes, the breath, and they listened to dreams. Dreams in the Middle Ages were sometimes believed to hold clues to illness. A bad dream might foretell fever. A series of dreams might be a sign from God, or a sign that the balance of humors had shifted dangerously. The folk healer would take all this in. She might light a small fire, Boil water in an iron pot. Add dried rose petals, nettle, licorice root. She might murmur a rhyme, or hum, or ask questions with a kindness few others showed. And sometimes, people got better, not because of miracles, but because of care. And sometimes, they didn't, because in the end, this was still the medieval world where infection could bloom from a splinter, and a chill could turn into death. But the healer did what she could. She did not promise cures, only comfort. Let your shoulders release now. Your breath is like the wind, over tall grass. You are sitting at the edge of a forest, near a cottage with smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, the healer is drying roots above the hearth. There are jars of beeswax, cloths soaked in vinegar, bundles of sage and rosemary tied with red thread. She sees you. She smiles. She does not ask what ails you. She simply brings you a cup of something warm. You drink it slowly. It tastes like honey and mint, and something older here. You are not afraid. The world is quiet. You are wrapped in wool and kindness. There were others like her men, though fewer. They lived in forests, on moors, in mountain villages. They were half feared and half adored. They might own a book or two, or none at all. Their library was the earth, the sky, the pulse of animals, the color of leaves. But their existence was fragile. The church did not look kindly on medicine, practiced outside its teachings. University-trained physicians, too, looked down on these healers, calling them ignorant, even dangerous. And so, these folk practices were pushed to the margins, sometimes embraced in private, but rejected in public. And when fear swept through, a village after a bad harvest, a child's death, a strange illness, it was often the folk healer who bore the blame. Some were accused of consorting with the devil, some were punished, some were burned, but most lived quietly. They kept tending, they kept helping, because people kept coming. Even when cities built hospitals and universities wrote books, people still came to the small cottage in the woods. They still trusted the one who remembered the right bark to chew when the teeth ached, or the right leaf to press when the belly turned sour. And in this way, folk medicine never disappeared. It became part of the undercurrent, present, quiet, flowing beneath the more formal structures. Even today, some of those ancient remedies remain. In your tea, in your garden, in the quiet advice your grandmother gave. Eat garlic when you're sick. Put honey on the wound. Rest. Let time do its work. Let time do its work now. Rest. You are in a room made of pine. The window is cracked open. You hear nothing but the hush of trees. A pot simmers on the stove. There is a cat asleep near your feet. You are safe. Outside, the stars turn slowly. Inside, healing takes no hurry. In our next part, we'll begin to explore the academic side of medicine, as it developed in medieval universities, how physicians were trained, what they learned, and how they tried to bring order to the body's mystery. But for now, let the hush remain. You've learned enough for tonight. And if you're still listening, I invite you once more to leave a comment, just a word or two. Are you still awake? Did the healer's story reach you? Or are you already somewhere else, in the drifting dark, where dreams begin? If your eyes are closed now, let them stay closed. If they're half open, let them fall gently. There's nothing more you need to see tonight. The world can wait. For now, you are drifting through time once more quietly, like parchment turning. In a slow breeze, we've wandered the meadows and villages, sat beside the hearths of folk healers, and listened to the quiet rhythm of the ordinary people who tried to care in a world that didn't always make it easy. Now, we step through carved wooden doors into a place filled with shadows and soft candlelight, the medieval university. It is the 13th century. The bells ring over stone courtyards. Robed students hurry between lectures. Latin fills the air, spoken, written, chanted. The scent is of ink, tallow, and dust. These are the newly formed schools of medicine, built alongside the great cathedrals of learning. Bologna, Montpellier, Paris, Oxford. Here, the study of medicine has finally found a formal home. But do not imagine a hospital. Not yet. Do not picture white coats or microscopes. Instead, imagine a lecture hall that smells of oil and age, filled with wooden benches. At the front stands a lecturer, often reading aloud from a heavy hand-copied book, the most respected of these books. The works of Galen, the ancient Greek physician whose writings had become gospel in the West. Alongside him, Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine. And more recently, Avicenna ibn Sina, whose canon of medicine had been translated from Arabic and was spreading like fire through the schools of Europe. The canon was a marvel of structure. It attempted to systematize medicine, defining diseases, categorizing symptoms, prescribing treatments. It approached the body as something that could be studied, ordered, understood. But these physicians did not dissect human bodies. That was still controversial, even forbidden. So they read, they debated, they memorized. They compared the shape of theory with the shape of life, often without touching the body itself. You may be wondering, how could someone heal without examining the patient? The truth is, many did not heal, at least, not in the way we understand it now. These physicians were scholars first. Diagnosis came from observation, yes, but also from philosophy. They studied the balance of humors, the influence of stars, the nature of air and temperament. Illness was not just a physical state, but a moral and spiritual imbalance. The four humors still dominated: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, each linked to an element, a personality, a season. A phlegmatic person, cold and moist, might be calm or lethargic. A choleric, hot and dry, might be ambitious, irritable, prone to fevers. These ideas were not fringe theories. They were the foundation of medical thinking for centuries. Treatments aimed to restore balance. Too much heat, apply something cold. Too much moisture, bleed the patient. The physician's tools were not surgical. They were symbolic. A urine flask, held up to the light, its color studied like a gemstone. A chart of planetary alignments, carefully considered before any decision was made. Imagine, if you will, a young student perhaps, not unlike yourself, scribbling notes by candlelight. He is hunched over a parchment, his fingers stained with ink. He is trying to understand the link between the spleen and melancholy. He is translating a sentence from Greek, then Latin, then into his native tongue. He has never seen inside a human body, and yet, he is certain, because the book is certain, and in the Middle Ages, authority mattered more than evidence. Let that idea rest beside you for a moment now. Breathe deeply. The flame of a candle flickers in the imagined corner of your mind. You are in the university dormitory now. A small, simple cell, wooden bed, thin blanket, cold stone floor. But there is a sense of purpose here, a calling. A desire to know, even if knowledge itself is still cloaked in superstition. You are not alone, beyond these walls. In another city, another student is doing the same reading, the same canon, contemplating the same imbalances. They will never meet, but their paths are parallel, like veins in a leaf. As universities grew, so too did the prestige of the physician. No longer merely the learned servant of the rich, physicians began to carve out a professional identity. Guilds were formed, licenses were granted, exams were held. By the 14th century, some cities required all physicians to pass official tests before practicing, and still there was very little they could actually do for most illnesses. But patients came anyway, because a kind word, an educated guess, and a sense of care was better than nothing. Because belief, however fragile, has power. Let that idea drift softly across your thoughts now. Belief has power. A doctor's robe, a candlelit consultation, a gentle question. These were not empty gestures. They were rituals. And in a world where medicine could not cure, rituals became medicine. You are standing now in a medieval library. High shelves of hand-copied manuscripts, some in Latin, some in Greek, a few in Arabic, awaiting translation. You run your fingers along the spines. One book is open, a diagram of the human body. Not quite anatomically correct, but lovingly drawn. Arrows point to organs, notes fill the margins in a curling script. A red line marks the liver. Another traces the veins toward the heart. There is reverence here, not for precision, but for the idea that knowledge is worth chasing, even if the road is long. Outside, the bells ring again. In the next part, we will explore what happened when physicians, for the first time in centuries, began to question the old books. When they dared to look inside the body, not just with imagination, but with knife in hand and open eyes. But that is for another night. Let your breath become slower. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let your thoughts be no more than leaves on a slow stream, carried gently beyond the reach of reason. And if you are still awake, though I doubt you are, leave a comment below. Something simple, still here, still listening, or just an emoji, a leaf, a candle, a moon. If you're still with me, then you are floating now, barely tethered to the present. The air around you is soft. The light is golden and slow. You are not in your bed, but somewhere else. Somewhere older, quieter, gentler, gentler. And tonight, we return to a turning point. We are in the late Middle Ages, somewhere between the 13th and 15th centuries. The walls of ancient universities still hold echoes of lectures in Latin. The monks still tend their herb gardens, and the healers in the woods still stir their pots by firelight. But something is changing. The world is shifting. The boundaries between the seen and unseen, the allowed and forbidden, are trembling at the edges, and for the first time in a very long time, someone dares to cut open a human body. Dissection. It is not a word said lightly. For centuries, the idea of cutting into a corpse was not just disturbing, it was sacrilegious. The human body was seen as sacred, whole, not to be disturbed even in death. But necessity, curiosity, and the slow, irresistible pull of knowledge began to wear away the silence. Let us go together now, to a stone building with high windows. It is winter. Outside, snow coats the rooftops. Inside, a group of university students gathers around a wooden table. On that table lies a human body. It is not fresh. It may have been taken from a prison or the gallows. Not a volunteer. There were no volunteers in those days. The body is stiff, wrapped in linen, the face covered. There is a physician present, robed, stern, with a manuscript open beside him. He is not the one who will cut. That task falls to a barber surgeon. The physician reads. The surgeon slices. They are not discovering something new. Not yet. They are confirming what is already in the book. If Galen said the liver was made of 5 lobes, they must find 5. If Avicenna declared the heart was the seat of heat, then heat must be there. The point is not to challenge the text, but to see it alive. But sometimes, what they saw did not match the words, and slowly, so slowly, the old certainties began to crack. There were whispers, scribbles, and margins, questions. What if Galen had never dissected a human? What if his knowledge came from animals? What if the body was more complex, more subtle, more mysterious than anyone had dared to imagine? You are lying still now. Your limbs are heavy. Your breath is long. You are in that room, but you are not afraid. You are the silence between the pages. The room is cold. The air smells of wax and something else, old flesh. Maybe. The students hold their breath. The blade cuts. The sound is soft, like cloth. The skin parts, the muscle revealed inside. A world unlike the one in the book. Not chaos, but not certainty either. Just reality. A warm, wet map that no one had ever truly seen before. There were those who pushed further, men like Mendino de Luzzi, who in the early 14th century published one of the first dissection manuals based on actual human bodies. His Anatomia became the standard text. In it, the body was divided and described with care and precision. Still deeply rooted in older traditions, but now shaped by experience. You may think this was science awakening, and in a way, it was, but it was not fast. Dissection remained rare, expensive, often illegal. A single dissection might be performed once a year, if they only, in major university cities. The body would decay quickly. Winter was preferred to slow the rot. Students might travel days just to witness the event. Imagine that devotion, the deep hunger to understand what lies beneath the skin. You are curled now in that thought, soft, slow, drifting beneath your own skin. Blood flows, muscles contract. Your heart beats with quiet insistence. These rhythms are ancient, and medieval scholars wanted desperately to understand them, not to replace belief, but to enrich it, to find, perhaps, the divine within the body itself. Still, most physicians never touched a cadaver. They worked with diagrams, with words, with dreams. Surgery was left to lower classes barber surgeons, who cut abscesses, pulled teeth, set bones. The division between thinking and doing was stark. The mind studied, the hand acted. Let your hand rest now. Uncurl your fingers. Feel the coolness of your sheets, like linen laid over an old anatomy table. Breathe, you are not in danger. We are only remembering. With the rise of anatomical interest came a rise in anatomical theaters. By the 15th century, in cities like Padua and Venice, great halls were built for the purpose of public dissections. Tiered seats surrounded a central table. Scholars, students, even the curious public would come to watch. It was a kind of performance knowledge. As theater. The blade sliced. The crowd leaned forward. What was revealed was not horror, but wonder that there was order beneath the surface. Structure, purpose. They saw the lungs like sponges, the intestines like folded cloth, the brain soft gray, coiled like mystery, and always the heart. The heart fascinated them. It was heat. It was life. It was soul. Some believed the soul entered through the crown of the head and settled in the heart, from which it pulsed outward into every limb. Others believed the liver was the true seat of life. Others still, the brain. No one agreed, but they kept looking, they kept cutting, they kept trying, because even the medieval medicine was limited, though its cures were few and its theories flawed. It was always rooted in one unshakable truth: the desire to help. Let that truth settle in your chest. Let it warm your ribs. This desire, this fragile human desire to reduce pain, to give comfort, to bring life, is older than any textbook. It still lives in you. You are no longer in a theater. You are on a quiet hillside. It is early spring. The grass is cold. The air is soft. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings. You lie on your back and look at the sky. Above you, stars begin to appear. The stars, they too were studied by medieval doctors. We'll speak of them soon. But for now, you are the sky. Still, open, infinite. And if you are still awakened, I suspect you're not tied. Invite you to leave a comment. Just a word, or a sigh, or a single star. Let me know you are here, with the students, with the scrolls, with the slow unfolding of the body's secret map. Next time, in part 15. We'll explore the relationship between medicine and the heavens, celestial influence, and how the stars shaped every diagnosis in the medieval world. Until then, rest easy. You are whole, you are healing, you are home. You are floating now, not in the past, exactly, but not in the present either. You are in a slow golden in-between. Time has loosened its grip. You are resting in a space where memory, imagination, and silence meet. And tonight, we look up. For in the world of medieval medicine, the body was never treated alone. It was always part of something larger, something distant, something divine. It was part of the cosmos. Tonight, we explore the role of astrology in medieval health, how the stars, the planets, and the quiet movements of heaven shaped the lives of and deaths of people far below. Close your eyes, if they are not already closed. Breathe softly, slowly, and let us begin. The night sky in the Middle Ages was not empty. It was full, rich with meaning, motion, and message. Every star had a name, every planet a personality. The heavens were seen as a mirror of the earth, a clock made not of gears, but of celestial light. Astrology was not entertainment, it was not a sideshow, it was medicine to heal the body. You first had to understand the sky. Let us go now, in our minds, to the chamber of a medieval physician. There is a table, a chart. A patient sits nearby, coughing quietly. Outside, the moon is nearly full. Before examining the body, the physician examines the birth chart, the natal horoscope of the patient. If that is unknown, he may draw a horary chart, based on the exact moment the question was asked. He studies the position of the moon, which governed bodily fluids, and of Mars, which brought heat, fever, and inflammation. Saturn, cold and dry, might signal melancholy or wasting disease. Jupiter was expansive, tied to the liver and to joy. Venus brought moisture, fertility, and often beauty. Each zodiac sign ruled a specific part of the body. Aries governed the head, Taurus, the neck and throat. Gemini, the arms and lungs. Cancer, the chest. Leo, the heart, Virgo, the intestines. Libra, the kidneys. Scorpio, the genitals. Sagittarius, the thighs. Capricorn, the knees. Aquarius, the shins. Pisces, the feet. So if your leg was in pain, a physician might check the position of Aquarius or Capricorn. If your chest was tight, he might consult Cancer or Leo. Each planet, each constellation had influence over organs, moods, and temperaments. The stars were not just distant lights. They were the clockwork of the human soul. Let that idea float over you like starlight. Now, breathe. Deep. Soft. Even. In times of illness, treatments were timed to match the sky. Bloodletting, for example, would only be performed when the moon was in the right sign. Ever when it was in the part of the sky that governed the affected organ. To cut when the moon was wrong could cause death. There were tables for this, almanacs, filled with planetary movements, moon phases, eclipses. Physicians carried them like tools. A well-trained doctor needed as much knowledge of the stars as of the body. You are lying under the stars now. The sky is vast, dark blue, freckled with cold fire. Imagine being a patient, centuries ago, waiting for the healer to arrive. You are sick, perhaps fevered. The room is dim. The windows are open to let out the bad air. A candle burns beside your bed. The healer comes in quietly. She touches your forehead. She feels your pulse. She asks your birth date, and then she consults a parchment, a map of the sky, drawn by hand. She nods. She tells you not to fear. It is just Mars. It will pass. You believe her, because belief is medicine. To let yourself believe. Now, not in the stars, but in the possibility of peace. You are wrapped in sleep, almost. The night is soft around you. In medieval hospitals, those early humble places of healing, the stars were carved into ceilings, painted on chapel walls, embroidered into priestly robes, because medicine was never separate from the sacred. Cure was not only herbs and diet and bleeding. It was prayer. It was timing. It was grace. You are walking now in your mind through a garden. It is night. The plants are sleeping. The moonlight touches the leaves like a blessing. Somewhere an owl calls. You are alone, but not lonely, because this garden is full of old wisdom. The people who lived in the Middle Ages may not have had our science, but they had their own systems of understanding. They did not separate the body from the soul, or the earth from the sky. Everything was part of the same great design. So they treated the body with plants, the spirit with prayer, the timing with stars, and for all its flaws, for all its mistakes, and gaps, and terrors. There is something deeply human in that attempt to make sense of suffering, to put order where there is pain, to believe that, somehow, the sky above could guide the healing below. Let your breath match the rhythm of the stars. Now slow, distant, eternal. Let your thoughts scatter like stardust. You are not sick, you are not worried. You are simply here, resting, warmed by the past, rocked gently by the old stories. And if you are still with me, still awake, somehow leave a trace in the comments. A moon emoji, a star, a constellation in words. Something small to say. I was here, under the sky, in the old world, where medicine was written in the language of light. In part 16, we'll look at medieval hospitals themselves, how they cared, who they served, what they felt like, the wards, the silence, the prayer. But for now, close your eyes if they're not already closed. And drift. You are among stars. You are in no danger. You are already healing. Good night. You're still here, still breathing, still drifting. The past hasn't let you go just yet, and maybe you're not ready to leave it. So we keep going tonight. We pass through a narrow archway, a stone threshold, a darkened corridor. We are entering a place of hope, of silence, of death, of mercy. We are entering a medieval hospital, but not like you know it, not with sterile hallways and bleeping monitors, not with waiting rooms and surgical masks and fluorescent lights. No, this hospital is older, quieter. It smells not of antiseptic, but of beeswax, wood smoke, lavender, and sweat. The year might be 1250, or 1370, or 1412, it hardly matters. We are somewhere in Europe. The language outside is Latin, or French, or Old English. There are carts in the street, candles in the windows. and the sick are being carried through the doors. They are not just here for surgery or pills. They are here to die, or to be saved, or to be seen, because to be seen was a kind of healing. Let us walk quietly inside now. Your footsteps echo, stone beneath your feet. You enter a large hall, long, open, with high vaulted ceilings. Rows of wooden beds line the walls. In each a body lies still, some breathing shallowly, some whispering prayers, some unmoving. There are no curtains, no privacy. Illness is not hidden here. It is part of the architecture. The first thing you notice is the altar. It is always visible. In most medieval hospitals, the Eucharist being raised during Mass, so that even if their bodies were failing, their eyes could rest on something eternal. Healing, you see, was not just about the flesh, it was about the soul. And so, before medicine came, prayer. Every hospital was a place of worship, often run by monks, or nuns, or religious orders like the Hospitallers, who took vows to care for the poor and sick, as acts of divine service. You're lying in one of those beds. Now, imagine it. The sheets are rough but clean. The pillow smells of herbs, perhaps rosemary or sage. To keep bad spirits away, a nun walks by. She checks your fever. She doesn't say much, but she lays a hand on your forehead. She murmurs something you don't understand the words, but the sound is soft, rhythmic, familiar, a psalm, maybe. It helps you sleep. These women, these caretakers, were the heart of medieval healthcare. They rose before dawn, they prayed, they washed the dying, they comforted the delirious, they whispered last rites, they scrubbed wounds, they changed bandages, they bore witness. Some were highly trained, others learned on the job, but most worked not for coin, but for God. They kept records, they passed knowledge down, they taught younger sisters how to recognize the signs of death, how to prepare bodies, how to blend balm for open sores, and they worked in silence, always in silence. Outside, the town moves on, carts clatter, merchants shout. But here, time has thickened, stilled. Let yourself feel that stillness now. You are in no rush, you are being watched over. All is calm, the meals are simple, broths, grains, sometimes a little wine, if the patient is strong enough, meat rarely. Too expensive. But the herbs, those are plentiful. From the garden just outside the herbarium, a sacred space of green. Each hospital grew its own medicine. Rose of thyme for cough, chamomile for fever, rue for warding off plague, lavender to cleanse the air, sage for memory. These plants were tended with prayer, watered with care, and each had its place in the balance of the humors, the ever-present theory of health. You remember them now. Blood, warm and wet. Phlegm, cold and wet. Yellow bile, warm and dry. Black bile, cold and dry. Each person, each illness, each mood traced back to an imbalance. The task of the hospital was not to cure, always, but to restore harmony. So the patient was watched, his stools were examined, his urine collected in a glass flask and studied against the light. The color, the smell, the bubbles, each a clue to the body's secret story. Imagine now a monk standing at the foot of your bed, holding a round-bottomed flask. The urine is pale gold. He lifts it to the candlelight. He frowns, he nods, then he leaves. No diagnosis, not yet. But someone is thinking about you. Someone is watching. And that, in the Middle Ages, was already part of the healing, because loneliness was illness too. You're not alone here. You are among the poor, the broken, the pilgrims. The abandoned medieval hospitals were not just for the sick, but for anyone in need. Orphans, widows, travelers, the homeless, the lepers, in separate buildings. Outside city walls, the incurable, too. No one was turned away, in theory, because to turn someone away was to turn away Christ. They believed that truly, and so, even in suffering, there was dignity. Even in decay, there was ritual. When a patient was dying, they were never left alone. The office of the dead would be read, candles would be lit, a priest would come, the last rites would be given, a soul would be guided home. There was fear, of course, but not chaos. Everything had its place. The hospital was a machine of yes, by our standards, but real, and human, and present. Let yourself be present now. Let your body rest against the mattress. Let your breath be long and slow and heavy. Let the sounds of the ward drift over you, distant coughs, murmured prayers, the occasional splash of water in a basin. There are no machines, no beeping, only breath and time. The ceiling above you is wooden, cross beams thick with soot. Above that, the sky, the stars, still watching, the planets still moving, and below them, the quiet work of hands trying to ease pain. Maybe they didn't know much, but they knew kindness, and sometimes that was enough. If you are still here, still somehow awake, leave a trace in the comments below, a candle emoji, or the word mercy. Let me know you've been to the ward with me. Let me know you lay still under the care of hands that no longer exist, but once made someone feel a little less alone. In part 17, we'll walk into the darkest chapter of medieval medicine, the Black Death, the plague, the panic, the perfume-filled masks, and how medicine tried and failed and kept trying. But not yet, not tonight. Tonight, you are safe. Tonight you are healing. Tonight you are already on your way home. Sleep well. It is very quiet now. Perhaps the silence feels different, heavier, like the air is thicker. It is because tonight, we enter a different kind of stillness. Not the stillness of sleep, but the stillness that follows catastrophe. We are going back to one of the most devastating moments in human history. The Black Death. The plague. Let yourself drift there now, slowly, softly. The year is 1347. You are in a town or a village, or a ship. It doesn't matter. What matters is the feeling. You are going about your life, baking bread, tending sheep, boiling herbs, walking to church. The air is cold and clean. You think about your neighbors, about tomorrow's chores, about whether your sore throat means anything. You do not yet know that death is coming, but it is already here, on a rat. In a flea, on a boat that docked weeks ago. Far away, no one sees it at first. Just a few people coughing, a child with a fever, then more, then more. Then the bells start. You remember the bells? They tolled differently now, slower, heavier funeral bells. And then, you begin to see it, the signs. A sudden fever, chills, headache, fatigue. Then the buboes, swollen lumps in the groin. The armpits, the neck, hard, painful, black. They appear suddenly, like a bruise beneath the skin, swelling and darkening with each passing hour, and soon, death. 2 days, 3, maybe less. There is no time to react, no time to understand, only panic. Let yourself breathe slowly now. Inhale. Exhale. Exhale. You are only visiting. You are safe. But for them it was not safe, not at all. By 1351, the plague had killed up to 1/3 of Europe's population. Some say it was closer to half. No one knew what caused it. Was it miasma, bad air? Was it punishment from God? Was it the alignment of the planets? The physicians disagreed, but they all tried to help. They wore long robes, often of waxed fabric, hats, and the now famous beaked masks, those long, bird-like faces filled with herbs and perfumes, meant to filter the air. They looked terrifying, but they believed the scent would keep the sickness out. They carried canes, not just to examine patients, without touching them, but to keep crowds away. To lift bedsheets, to prod the living and the dead alike. Imagine now, one of those figures approaching, a long coat, a face like a crow, the smell of cloves and vinegar. They do not speak, they only watch. Then they move on, because there is nothing they can do. The medieval treatments, bloodletting, purging, herbal balms, none of them worked. Not for the plague. The physicians, the barber surgeons, the monks, they all kept trying. But they began to die too. Hospitals overflowed. Gravediggers collapsed in the fields. Mass graves were dug with no prayers, no names, no records. There were not enough priests for last rites, not enough wood for coffins, not enough time in towns. Whole streets went silent. Doors boarded up, candles left burning in empty windows. In villages, animals wandered loose. Children cried alone. Even the wealthy could not hide. Even kings fell ill. The plague did not care about class. It came for all, and still, people searched for meaning, the church said. Sin. Repent. Pray. Some joined flagellant movements, men who walked from town to town, whipping themselves in penance, begging God for mercy. They bled in the streets, they sang hymns through the pain. They believed their suffering might lift the curse. It did not. Others blamed outsiders. Strangers, Jews, were falsely accused of poisoning wells, leading to horrific acts of violence and expulsion. The fear twisted hearts, it always does. Let yourself be still, breathe. This is history. We walk through it gently, softly, even here, in the shadows. Even now, there were moments of care. People risked their lives to stay with the dying. Nuns nursed entire wards until not one was left alive, including themselves. Some physicians stayed behind. Not for fame, not for money, just so someone would still be there. They burned herbs, they boiled vinegar, they held hands, they watched people slip away, and sometimes they buried them quietly, kindly, because if medicine could not heal, it could still bear witness, it could still comfort. And even that was something. In time, the plague passed. It came in waves, returning every few decades. But the Great Horror, the first wave, left scars that would never fully heal. Economies collapsed, whole villages disappeared from maps, families were gone forever, but some survived, and life somehow continued. Let yourself feel that now. The quiet return of birdsong, a child laughing, the ringing of a church bell, not for death this time but for mass. Some hospitals reopened. Some doctors wrote down what they'd seen, notebooks filled with sorrow, with confusion, with strange sketches of symptoms and theories. They didn't know much, but they knew what mattered. That life was fragile, that bodies fail, that comfort matters, that mercy counts. You are lying in your bed now, maybe with your eyes closed, maybe still half awake. You are not in 1347. You are here, safe, warm, unharmed. But you carry the memory of those who came before, the ones who held on, the ones who did their best with what they had. That's what medicine was. Then not always effective, rarely safe, but full of people trying to help, trying not to be afraid, trying to understand something bigger than themselves. Leave a trace in the comments, if you're still awake, a black heart, a crow emoji, or just one word still. Let me know you passed through the plague with me, in silence, and came out the other side. There's a hush again, a deeper quiet. As though the world itself is holding its breath. You are still resting, still breathing, still lying, still in the warm dark folds of the past. And now we walk further away from the plague-ridden cities and overcrowded hospitals. We're going somewhere, even quieter, even more forgotten. We're walking to the edge, to the walls just beyond the town, where the grass grows taller, where the roads are less traveled, where bells sound not for worship, but for warning. Tonight we are walking to a leper house. Do not be afraid, it is not cruel here. Not in the way you might imagine. There is sadness, yes, but also strange kindness. Let's begin. In the medieval mind, leprosy, what they called leprosy, was not just a disease of the body, it was a disease of the soul. It was punishment, some said, a divine mark, a visible sign of inner corruption. Others believed it was simply contagious. Others, still more compassionate, saw lepers as sacred sufferers, martyrs on earth, living reminders of Christ's pain. There was no consensus, but there was fear, and fear always brings boundaries. So, the leprosarium was built far away, sometimes called a lazaretto, named for Lazarus, the man Christ raised from the dead. This was a place not of treatment, but of separation. Imagine walking there now. You follow a narrow path beyond the trees. The grass brushes your feet. There is a gate, stone walls, a bell tower. The bell is silent now, but once it would ring to announce a visitor, or a death. You enter quietly inside. You find low buildings, a chapel, a few small rooms, a kitchen garden, and people, not monsters, not ghosts. People. With bandaged hands, with covered faces, with distant eyes. They are sewing or praying or singing. Softly they are alive. This is not a prison, not entirely. Many came willingly to protect their families, to protect themselves, to find a kind of peace. Some were brought by force, but others chose it. They took vows. They accepted the rules. They surrendered their former names. and were given new ones in this way. The leprosarium became its own community, structured, sacred still. The first step to entering was the ritual of separation. This was no small moment. The church would hold a ceremony for the leper. Sometimes in full view of the town, the priest would say prayers over them, then sprinkle earth on their body, as though burying them. They would be given a cloak, a wooden clapper, sometimes a bell, and then they would walk away from home, from family, from everything. It sounds cruel, and in some ways, it was, but there was also a deep ritual logic to it. To be cast out was also, in the medieval mind, to be cleansed in a strange way. To suffer was to be sanctified. To lose the world was to find God. Let yourself breathe here. Inhale. Exhale. You are not being cast out. You are only visiting. You walk through the small garden now. It smells of mint and yarrow. You pass a man who smiles faintly, but does not speak. His hands are wrapped in linen. The skin beneath is dry. Cracked. Numb. This is what the disease did. It numbed the nerves. It deadened sensation. People would burn themselves, cut themselves, break fingers, and feel nothing. Infections would follow, and the body would break down, piece by piece, but slowly, over years, sometimes decades. It was not the instant horror of the plague. It was long, quiet, exhausting, but not without care. Here in the leper house, patients lived modestly. They ate simply: porridge, beans, vegetables, fish. If it was nearby, there was wine. Sometimes it was medicinal. There were clean linens, fresh air. Routine. They were allowed to marry, though only to one another. They could work gardening, weaving, cooking. They could attend mass in a side chapel, separated by a screen, and always they lived apart. The church oversaw most leper houses. Charity was expected. Caring for lepers was considered a holy act. Many nobles left money in their wills to fund these places, to pray for their souls, to ease their guilt. And so the leper house continued, year after year, quietly at the edge of the world. Let yourself feel what that means to be alive, to be cast out, and still to be cared for, still to be fed, still to be given a bed, a name, a purpose. It wasn't medicine, exactly, but it was something like dignity. Even here, even now, the medieval world was full of walls between the sick and the healthy, between the clean and the unclean. But behind those walls, life continued. Lepers still laughed, still made jokes, still found comfort in the sun, still sang together during feast days, still lit candles in the dark, still waited for the end. And when it came, they were buried here, in consecrated ground, with prayers, with bells, with name carved into stone. Not always their original name, but a name nonetheless, a memory. You can rest now. You've seen what most never see. Not kings, not wars, not plagues, but the quiet endurance of the forgotten. The medicine of stillness, of acceptance, of being seen, even from afar. If you are still awake, if the hush hasn't lulled you, completely, leave a comment below. A candle, a tree, or just the word, seen. So I know you passed through the gate with me. So I know you saw what most never look for. In part 19, we will walk back into the town, into the world of folk healers, charm makers, and cunning women. Magic and medicine. Whispers and roots. But for now, let the quiet hold you. Let the air around you stay still. Let sleep come slowly, like a shadow crossing a hill. Good night. The air feels softer now, warmer. The cold stone walls and distant bells fade behind you as you step back toward the town. The village or city wakes slowly. Life continues quiet and steady. People move about their chores, women tend gardens, children chase each other laughing, and somewhere, the faint scent of herbs drifts through the air. You follow it now, not to a hospital or a church, but to the small, shadowed homes where folk healers live. They are sometimes called wise women. Or cunning folk. Or charmers. They are the healers of the common people, not trained in the universities, not robed in silk or beaked masks, but deeply knowledgeable in plants. In roots. In rituals passed down through generations that carry no scalpel, no leech, but hands that know how to soothe, how to comfort, how to coax the body toward healing. They gather herbs from meadows and forests. They boil teas. They bind poultices. They whisper prayers. They carry small bones, or stones, or feathers, or bits of cloth tied with thread. These are the tools of their craft, not always understood, often feared by the learned doctors, sometimes accused of witchcraft, but necessary, because in a time when doctors bled patients until they fainted, and when prayers sometimes failed, the folk healers offered something else, a promise that healing was possible, that pain could be eased, that the body and spirit were connected. Imagine now walking into one of their homes. It is dark inside, filled with the smell of dried flowers and burning herbs. A fire crackles softly. The healer moves quietly, preparing a remedy. She does not rush. Her voice is calm, her hands steady. She asks you about your symptoms, about your dreams, about what you have eaten. She listens, she watches. She knows the language of the body, of the earth, of the unseen. She might chant softly. She might draw symbols in the air. She might place a charm around your neck. The cure is never certain, but it is always given with care, with respect, with hope. Let yourself feel that hope now, that soft light in the dark, because sometimes that was the best medicine of all. The medieval world was filled with uncertainty, with danger, with pain, but it was also filled with people who tried, who cared, who whispered prayers in the night, who plucked leaves from the wild, who offered hands to hold. You are safe here. You are resting. And now, as you drift deeper, remember the folk healer's gentle touch, the soft rustle of leaves, the quiet power of belief, the slow, steady heartbeat of the earth itself. If you are still with me, leave a sign below. A leaf, a flame, the word hope. So I know you walk these shadowed paths softly. In part 20, we will close our journey through medieval medicine by looking at the final transformation, the slow emergence of science from superstition, and how the darkest times led to new beginnings. But for now, rest deeply, sleep well, good night. The night is deep now. The world outside is quiet. The stars watch silently. You are safe. You have traveled far, through shadows and sickness, through walls of stone and whispered prayers, and now you rest. But before you close your eyes completely, let us take one last breath together. A breath that carries us toward morning, because even in the darkest times, there was light waiting, a slow, steady light. The medieval world was not just filled with fear, it was filled with questions, with curiosity, with wonder. Even as doctors bled their patients, and healers whispered, spells and prayers rose in the candlelight. The seeds of change were quietly sown. Universities began to teach medicine more systematically. Books were copied and shared. Anatomy was studied, painfully and carefully. People started to watch, to measure, to test, to doubt. The Renaissance waited quietly beyond the horizon, with new tools, new ideas, new hope. So as you drift deeper into sleep, remember this: medicine was never just about cures. It was about trying, about reaching, about caring in the best way they knew. And that is a human story, one that continues. Still tonight, you carry that story with you. You carry the hands of those who came before, their fears, their hopes, their quiet courage. Let that comfort you. Let that calm you. Sleep, now. Let the past rest, and when you wake, know that you carry a little light from those distant days. Good night. Thank you for journeying through medieval medicine with me. If this quiet history brought you calm, leave a moon, a star, or simply the word rest. Sleep well.